Bountiful harvest we made this month, a tour of the California garden, some things for you to do. All this and a lot more in today's episode of California Gardening. So let's begin with the harvests we made this month, beginning with apples. Now we have a few apple trees growing, and due to the Santa Ana winds, all our apples fell down, and these were very nice and ripe apples. They were very sweet and very delicious. Bitter gourds. Bitter gourds were towards the end of the season. The ones in the container were still producing, which is what we harvested this month. And this bitter gourd variety is a dwarf variety that's growing in this container. And I was a little surprised that it was still producing bitter gourds all the way through November. Cucumbers. Our Japanese cucumbers were still producing in November, and this is the last crop of cucumbers that we harvested from this plant growing in a container. And once again, the Japanese cucumbers are absolutely delicious cucumbers. They're very crunchy, very delicious, and easy to grow. And you can look at our harvest here. This is going to be our final harvest of Japanese cucumbers for the season. Guavas. We were growing a couple of guava varieties. This one is the Tropic Red variety, also called the Tropic Pink variety. It has a pinkish red flesh, and I'm going to cut open this guava and show you how it looks like from the inside. And you can see nice, rich, deep color. It does have large seeds, and it's not too sweet. I think it's less sweet than the white guavas, but it also has a very nice flavor, a nice tropical fragrance, a nice tropical flavor to it. So this guava is great if you want to just eat it raw or even make some smoothies out of it. This is a good guava variety to grow. However, if you're looking for very sweet guavas or guavas that are a little bit sweeter than the usual guavas that you get in the store, then I suggest that you grow the Tropic White variety that you see here. And we had this one tree growing in our backyard, and you can see it has so many guavas, so many fruits that the branches have all fallen over. And you can see lots of guavas in this tree. This is a few years old now. We started this as a very small tree. It has now grown to a big sized tree now. And you can look at all the guavas. They are quite nice looking guavas. And it's better to harvest them when they are about this ripe that you see here. And they are very nice. They have a nice sweet flavor. They are not overly sweet, but they are nice and crunchy. They have a sweet flavor, and in my opinion are the best tasting guavas. Hyacinth beans. As you all know, we have our hyacinth bean plant growing along our wall, and it has become quite a massive plant now. We harvested a lot of hyacinth beans from this in the previous month, and you can see how tall the plant has become, and I needed a ladder again to harvest these hyacinth beans. And you can see how dense the plant has become, and this was grown from a very small plant, and it has grown to a huge plant, as you can see here. And all the hyacinth beans, they are very nice, crunchy, fresh, right from your backyard. Unlike the ones you get at the grocery store, these are far more flavorful, far more crunchy and delicious. And we kept coming back for more and more harvests of the hyacinth beans. As you see here, the plant just keeps producing a lot of hyacinth beans. Now, one thing again to note about hyacinth beans is that you must cook these beans before you eat them. You can look at our harvest here. Bountiful harvest. This is a huge harvest of hyacinth beans. And in just a few days, we were back again at harvesting more. So all in all, we were harvesting hyacinth beans from this plant almost every week. And this plant still kept producing more and more hyacinth beans. And you can look at one more harvest here. Quite a lot of hyacinth beans that we harvested from just these few plants. Moving on to ivy gourd. The ivy gourd plant or the Tindora plant was growing on the trellis on our last raised bed. And you have seen us harvesting a lot of ivy gourds from this plant all throughout the summer season. And I think November is the last month when this ivy gourd plant is producing a lot of ivy gourds. In fact, I was surprised to see this plant producing even in November. But we did have a few hot days in November this year, a lot of hot and windy days. So the ivy gourd plant was still fruiting, still producing some ivy gourds even in November. But it has definitely started slowing down now. But you can look at our harvest in November. This is quite a good harvest for the month of November. Meyer lemons. We had our Meyer lemon plant that was growing in the ground, and it started producing a lot of lemons now. You can see this is a ripe lemon, the one in yellow. But you can also harvest this lemon when it's green. And plenty more lemons on the plant. The Meyer lemon is not very tart. It has a nice flavor, great for lemonades, and quite good in taste. Lettuce. We were growing our lettuce plants in a container, and as you can see here, they have begun to bolt now due to the hot weather that we've had in November. And it's quite surprising that lettuce would bolt in November. But we did have quite a lot of warm days, as I mentioned, in November, which has caused these lettuce plants to bolt. So the way we are harvesting this lettuce is to just cut the top part of the stem out and use these leaves. Now the best use for lettuce that we find is to just juice them. They have a lot of vitamins and minerals, and if you juice them, you can get a lot of juice out of these leaves. Moringa. We harvested not only the leaves of the moringa plant that you see here, we eat them fresh as well as the dried leaves, but we also harvested the pods. Now the moringa pods are absolutely delicious when cooked in a dish called sambar that a lot of you are aware of, and we did harvest a lot of moringa from our garden this month. Moving on to okra. Our jambalaya okra was still producing in the month of November. Now the jambalaya okra is one variety that starts producing very early and still keeps producing late in the season, which is quite unique for this variety. So I really loved growing the jambalaya okra. As you can see, the plant produces a lot of okra. Now once again, this plant is not as prolific as some of the other okra varieties, but nonetheless this is an excellent variety that produces a lot. And there were several days in November where we were harvesting these okras, and they did quite well. You can see all these okras that are growing on a relatively small plant. Moving on to pineapple. We had our pineapple plants growing in a container, and as you can see here, we started this plant from suckers from a different plant that we grew. And you've all watched my pineapple growing videos earlier, and you can see here one pineapple plant can produce more than one pineapple. There are 4 pineapples in fact growing right now, and this is just in a container. Now when I began harvesting this plant, I was about to get my pruners and harvest it, but it just fell off the stem. So when the pineapple plant is ripe, you can just snap it off the stem. It should come off easily. And just look at this pineapple here. It is a very nice looking pineapple. It ripened on the plant, unlike the pineapples you get at the grocery store, which are ripened artificially. And this pineapple is very good looking, and I did want to cut it up and show you how it looks like from the inside. And first of all, it smelled really nice, very nice fragrance. The typical fragrance of ripe fruit. And I'm not an expert in cutting a pineapple, so I'm going to skip through this step and show you how I cut up the pieces for the pineapple. And the top of the pineapple can actually be planted back into a different plant. And I'm going to show you how the pineapple roots look like in this pineapple top, just to give you an idea of how this plant will grow. So here you can see all these roots. If you plant this in soil or keep it in a glass of water, it will send out these roots which can be planted as a new plant. And look at the pineapple pieces here. These are absolutely delicious pineapples. Very sweet and very nice. Pomegranates. We were growing the Parfianka pomegranate variety in our garden. And you can see it produced large pomegranates that you see here. And the plant itself has become quite large. Once again, this was a very small plant when we started. It's been 2 years now, and this plant has really taken off and has started producing a lot of pomegranates. Now, here are the 2 that we harvested from this plant, and they're absolutely nice looking pomegranates. And once again, I'm going to cut open this pomegranate to show you how it looks like. And the Parfianka pomegranate has nice dark seeds, as you see here. They are very good looking seeds, full of antioxidants and vitamins and minerals that are very good for your health. And not only that, these seeds also have a lot of juice. So this pomegranate variety is great for eating raw or for juicing. And the seeds are quite sweet, they're very nice, very delicious, they have a very nice unique taste. And they're very similar to the wonderful pomegranate variety that you get at the grocery store. But I still prefer the taste of the Parfianka pomegranate. Lots of pomegranate seeds here, and we are almost done removing all the pomegranate seeds from the fruit. And you can see here, beautiful looking pomegranate. The seeds are just awesome. Let's wash it up and show you how it looks like. Absolutely gorgeous looking pomegranate seeds. Radish. We were growing several radish varieties in our garden. This one is the pink daikon radish. Now we had saved seeds for this radish from our previous year, and you can see here these radishes have grown quite well. And this was just growing in a container next to our plumeria plant, which is a flowering plant. It does have some space around it, so we just planted a few and they're growing quite well. As you see here, the harvest looks quite beautiful. Now we were also growing the royal purple variety of radish in our raised beds. Now this is a new variety for 2021. You can see the radish here. They're absolutely beautiful looking radishes. Now all that color that you see means that the radish has a lot of anthocyanins, which means it has a lot of vitamins and minerals that are great for your health. And you can see here the harvest. After washing these radishes, they look quite beautiful. And we also had some more radish varieties that we were growing. You can see here this is a medley of nice looking radishes. And I wanted to cut open this particular radish. This is the black Spanish radish. The black Spanish radish, or the Spanish black radish, you can call it either way, is a very pungent variety. Now I was quite surprised at how pungent this variety is. If you like strong radish flavor, this is an excellent variety to grow. You can see how the flesh looks like from the inside. And I mostly eat my radishes raw. And when I was eating these radishes, I found that these were quite pungent. And although this is an early radish, it was quite a pungent variety. And this is the purple radish, the royal purple radish. It's exactly the opposite of the black Spanish radish. This is a mild radish variety. It has a very mild flavor, excellent for snacking. In fact, I was eating this radish almost every day in my salads. I was just eating them raw, and they were quite flavorful and quite nice. They're very similar to the cherry bell radish or the other early radish varieties. And here you can see once again the black Spanish radish looks a little different. And this is another radish. This is the white radish. It has a little bit of a black color on the top, and it's actually the same variety, the Spanish radish. So it does have that same pungent flavor. It just looks white rather than black on the outside. But all in all, a great radish variety to grow. And we were back in our raised bed to harvest the rest of the royal purple radishes. The radishes had matured, and we also wanted to make space to plant our next crops. So we were back at harvesting these royal purple radishes. And as you can see here, these radishes grow very quickly. They produce abundantly, and they don't need any fertilizer. They're just an amazing crop to grow. And you can look at our soil here. It contains a lot of compost, a lot of worm castings. We always add worm castings in our garden to make the soil more fertile and it does have a very nice effect on how we grow the plants. And you can look at our radish harvest here. Quite a lot of radishes that we harvested from this raised bed. And this is how it looks like after washing them. Beautiful looking radishes. Mustard spinach. This was a new variety that we were growing this year. And you can look at the leaves here, beautiful looking leaves. Now the mustard spinach is a variety that is a spinach, but it has a subtle flavor of mustard. So it's a very unique vegetable to grow, unique green to grow in your garden. And once again, as I mentioned last month, there is an Indian dish called sarson ka saag, which includes adding both spinach and mustard in the recipe. But if you grow mustard spinach, you can just use the mustard spinach leaves and make this dish, and it tastes really nice. Now I've also eaten these raw. They taste amazing in a salad. These mustard spinach leaves are quite flavorful, quite nice. They actually taste like spinach, but they have a little bit of a mustard flavor, which tastes really good. And here you can look at our harvest, quite a good looking bunch of mustard spinach. Sunchokes. We were growing our sunchokes in a container, and actually these were just plants that were left out of the last year's harvest. When we harvested the sunchokes last year from our raised beds, we planted a couple of plants in this container, and you can see the plant has already produced a lot of these tubers, the sunchoke tubers. And for those of you who haven't watched my earlier videos on growing sunchoke, please do that. I've covered this in a lot of detail in a previous video where I've grown this in a container and gotten a great harvest. Now I do recommend that you grow sunchokes in containers just because the plant can get very invasive. When we grew this in our raised bed, these sunchokes had taken over our raised bed and had grown everywhere. So you solve that problem by growing in a container. You can see we added a lot of compost, a lot of straw, and this is one of the best mixes that you can use for your container plants. A mix of peat moss, a lot of compost, manure, and perlite, and then just top it off with some straw. And that makes a great mix for your container. Now you can look at the sunchokes here. Some of the sunchokes will be discarded because they are green in color. And just like potatoes, you don't want to eat the sunchokes that are green. And the plants here can actually be replanted. They will grow back into a new plant soon. Not in the winter season, but in the spring season. But you can see how nice these sunchokes have grown, and they've produced a lot of tubers, as you can see. And this is a harvest, not a very big harvest I would say, but considering that we just put in a couple of plants from the previous season, it's a decent harvest. And you can look at this sunchoke tuber. We're going to discard this because it has a green color. Just like potatoes, the ones that are green are not recommended to be eaten, so we discard them. But even then, we have a lot of sunchokes that you can see here. After washing them, we use them to make sunchoke chips, which were quite delicious. Tomatoes. This is our second crop of tomatoes that we were growing. We started this in August, and these are determinate tomato plants. And you can look at our harvest here. There are still many more on the plant. Now we also had our San Marzano tomato that was growing in a container. And I'm surprised that the San Marzano tomato is still producing. It's producing quite a lot of tomatoes still in November. And that's because we did have some warm days, but the plant is still very much alive. It doesn't have any diseases, and it just keeps going. So all in all, I'm very happy with the way the San Marzano tomatoes produced this year. And that too in a container. This is an indeterminate tomato variety, growing in a container, and still producing quite a lot of tomatoes. And now let's begin with the garden tour, starting with our raised beds. In the first raised bed, we have a lot of onions growing. We planted these from onion sets, and they have grown quite well now within a month. We also have a lot of radish. You can see the radish is forming now. They're ready for harvest anytime now. And all the bean plants that we planted were totally destroyed by the Santa Ana winds. Now the tomatoes are growing well. You can see the determinate tomatoes. There are quite a lot of tomatoes on this plant. And our pole bean plants have managed to survive the winds and are growing on this trellis. Now we already have pole beans that we planted a lot earlier. And you can see there are a lot of pole beans on this plant. Some of the beans have dried, which will be used for seeds for the next year. And we planted some brassicas here, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbages and cauliflowers. And you can see the Santa Ana winds have destroyed a couple of plants, so we'll replant them. And we also have radishes on this side. You can see the radish is growing quite well now. There are different varieties we planted. And in the next raised bed where we have all the brassicas, you can see cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli. This is the red acre cabbage. All of them are growing really well. And this net is protecting them from insects and diseases. You can see that they're growing quite well. In the next raised bed, we have more brassicas, some more broccoli, as you see here. The broccoli is now forming their heads. Some beets, some cauliflowers. And we have this one huge eggplant. This is the black moon eggplant. And you can see it's still producing an eggplant. There's a big one here, as you can see. And once again, due to the Santa Ana winds, you can see one of the branches snapped off. But hopefully it will survive. We planted a lot of kale. We will use these kale leaves for salads and for juicing. They're extremely healthy, very nice looking kale. And in the final raised bed, we have a lot of cabbages growing. These are the red cabbages. And there are quite a lot of cabbages here, 6 in all. And they are growing well. We also have some radish growing in the center. And these have not formed radishes yet. But they will be ready for harvest within a month or so. We sowed some spinach seeds here. As you can see, the surface of the soil is so dry because of the winds we had. And a couple more brassicas and some radishes. We also have some bunching onions on the side. You can see the greens have grown quite well. And finally we have our ivy gourd plant on the trellis. And that completes the tour of our raised beds. Let's now move on to the containers. In the first container we have broccoli. We planted a couple of broccoli plants. And they're forming their heads now. We have our carrots. We sowed some carrot seeds here. We have our pepper plant that we are trying to overwinter. This is the Surajmukhi pepper plant. We have some more carrots. These are the atomic red carrots. And we have some radish. These radishes are growing quite well in this container. And we have a determinate tomato plant. This is the Bush Roma tomato plant. And we have our taro root plant that's growing well. Multiple varieties. And you must have noticed here that we replaced all the saucers for our containers with the green stalk spinner. The green stalk spinner was on sale for Black Friday. And it's going to be on sale till the 29th of November. And you can see how the water is draining back into the planter area. You can see here this is a good example of how the water is draining out in the planter area. And it keeps the pots really nice. It keeps the plants healthy too. We have lettuce growing in the next container. Followed by onions. These are onions planted from sets. And this plant is the Giloy plant. I have spoken about this plant earlier. We have our cardamom plant, which is growing on the planter area. Not something I've usually shown. We trimmed down our mint plant completely so that it regrows vigorously. That's the whole idea of trimming down your mint plants in the winters. And you can look at our guava tree. The branches have all fallen down. They're very heavy now due to the fruits. We have our turmeric plant in this container, followed by our mustard spinach plant. You saw us harvesting a lot of mustard spinach. And then our San Marzano tomato plant, which is also growing well, producing a lot of tomatoes. We have our bunching onions. The greens are quite nice, as you can see here. We may start harvesting the greens. And we have some more radish growing in this container, this whiskey barrel container. This one is the daikon radish, followed by our black moon eggplant. We still kept 2 eggplants in our container. You can see how battered it is because of the Santa Ana winds. We have our hyacinth bean plants. This is a new crop that we planted just recently. And in the next container, we have peas. Some of these peas are growing okay. And then we have our tomato plant. This is again a bush tomato variety. This is the Bush Glacier tomato plant. And on the next container, we have some brassicas. You can see the cauliflowers growing now, doing quite well. We have 3 of these in a container. And rest of it are the same, the Meyer lemon plant, the curry leaf plant. They're all growing quite well. We have the pineapple guava plant. On the other side, we have our ivy gourd plant that's growing quite well. But now it's the end of the season, so you can see the leaves are falling down. Our pigeon pea plant was flowering, but again, due to the winds, it's not looking that good. But you can still see a lot of buds on the plant. We have our longevity spinach plant, one of the best plants in the winter season to eat and to juice. We have our Java plum plant or the jamun plant and the pineapple guava plant next to it. And that concludes the tour of our containers. And now let's look at some things to do in your garden, starting with setting up hoops or netting for your raised beds. Now this is a raised bed that didn't have any hoops, no netting, and we put some rebars here. The number of rebars should be twice the number of hoops that you want, and we used 2-foot rebars and then put them in the ground till it went all the way inside, leaving about a foot outside. So as long as the rebar is firmly fixed in the ground, you should be fine. And one of the benefits of adding these hoops and the netting is that you don't need to use any pest control. We are using this Plex pipe that you can find at Home Depot or Lowe's. They're easy to cut. They're less rigid than PVC pipes. So this Plex pipe can be just pushed into the rebar and then pushed into the other side of the rebar, as you see here, to create this hoop. And this is enough to support the netting that we will be adding. And the number of hoops really depends on the length of your raised bed. Now in this case, we added 5 hoops, as you can see. They're not all equally placed, but I had to move one hoop a little far away due to the way we planted the existing seeds in the bed. But it doesn't really matter, as you'll soon see. And we have these brassicas that we are planting. And once the plants are planted, you can add the netting on the top. And you can see this is how the netting looks like once everything is completed. This will protect your plants from insects, from diseases, or even winds, high winds. This does a good job. So it's a great tip for you to follow in your garden to protect your plants. And the next tip I wanted to share was about trimming your mint plant. Now in the winter season, the mint plants will have leaves that are not so good. So what I usually do is at the end of the winter, I just chop up the mint plant all the way to the surface. And what this does, it lets the plant come back vigorously once you start watering the plant, once you start adding nutrients. In the winter and the spring season, it will come back very vigorously and you will have really good quality mint that you can harvest. So there we have it, folks. That was our November episode for California gardening. Please hit that like button if you like this video. It does help the channel a lot. And if you're not already a subscriber, hit that subscribe button to get all future updates. If you have a comment, drop them in the comments box below. We'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.